Sir, please, could you just help me? The voice cut through the hiss of rain and the impatient honking of a Manhattan morning. Gavin stopped mid-step, clutching the strap of his worn leather satchel as if it were his lifeline. He was already 20 minutes behind for the job interview that might finally pull him and Ellie out of the cycle of temp work and overdue rent. And there she was, Ava Sinclair. He didn't know her name yet, but everyone else on the street probably did. The woman in the tailored charcoal coat hair swept into a no-nonsense chignon, one heel wedged between the iron teeth of a subway grate. She was leaning down, trying to free it, muttering something sharp under her breath, glancing at the Rolex on her wrist like it was about to explode. "I'm fine. Just go," she said when she noticed him staring. The words came clipped, the kind people use when they're used to handling everything themselves. But the look in her eyes told another story, one Gavin recognized. The look of someone who didn't expect anyone to stop. "Hold on," he said, stepping toward her. Rain drummed against his shoulders. "You'll snap the heel clean off if you keep pulling like that." "I don't care if I have to crawl to my meeting," she bit back. "I'm late." Gavin dropped his satchel on the wet pavement and crouched, ignoring the cold seeping into his knees. "So am I," he muttered, wrapping both hands around the shoe and twisting the metal grate just enough for the heel to slip free. Her eyes widened. "You knew how to... Had a sister who used to get stuck in these things every Sunday after church," he said, handing the shoe back. "Learned the trick fast." She slipped it on, still balancing awkwardly, then straightened her coat. "You just missed your light," she said, nodding toward the crosswalk. "I'll catch the next one," he replied. And then, almost as an afterthought, "No one deserves to be left stuck like that." Something in his tone made her blink. But she didn't answer. She just hurried away, the sharp click of her heels fading into the noise of the city. By the time Gavin reached the towering glass lobby of Blake & Harper Consulting, his shirt clung damp to his back. The security guard barely looked up as he signed in. Upstairs, the receptionist glanced at the clock and gave him the kind of smile that wasn't a smile at all. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter," she said. Voice syrupy but firm. "The partners have already begun the interviews. We can't reschedule. I was only..." He stopped. Excuses wouldn't matter. He glanced at the neat, intimidating list of candidates on her clipboard, last names that read like private schools and legacy wealth. People who didn't have to run through the rain in second-hand shoes. "Thank you for coming," she added, already turning to greet the next man in a perfectly tailored navy suit. Gavin stepped back into the hallway, each click of that man's polished shoes sounding like a door closing. That evening, the apartment smelled faintly of tomato soup and the crayons Ellie had left on the kitchen table. She was sitting cross-legged on the couch, pencil tucked behind her ear, a stack of note cards in her lap. "How'd it go, Dad?" she asked without looking up. He hung his jacket by the door, forcing a smile. "They went with someone else." Ellie finally looked at him, tilting her head in that way she had when she didn't buy what he was selling. "Or, you didn't get to tell them how awesome you are." Before he could answer, she shuffled her note cards and cleared her throat. "Okay, sir. This is a very serious interview. Why do you want this job?" He chuckled, dropping onto the couch beside her. "Because my boss is 9 and she eats all the good cereal." She rolled her eyes. "Try again, Mr. Carter." He met her gaze, that fierce, unblinking gaze far too old for her years. "Because I want to build a life where you never feel like you have to apologize for who you are." She pretended to jot something down. "A strong answer," she murmured, then set the cards aside and hugged him without warning. "You're still the best candidate, Dad." For the first time all day, the tightness in his chest eased. Across town, Ava Sinclair stood in the marble foyer of the Sinclair & Comey building, shaking rain from her umbrella. The deal was signed, the contract worth more than most people made in a lifetime. Yet her thoughts kept snagging on the stranger in the rain. No one deserves to be left stuck like that. It wasn't just what he'd said, it was how. No self-pity, no angle, just truth. Her assistant approached with a tablet full of numbers, but Ava waved her off. Later, she said, her voice softer than usual. The truth was, she couldn't remember the last time a man had helped her without expecting something in return. She didn't even know his name, but she remembered his eyes, and somehow she knew she wouldn't forget them. That night, as the city lights blinked in the rain-slick streets, Gavin lay awake listening to Ellie breathe. He had no idea the choice he'd made that morning, the choice that had cost him his one shot, had already started a chain of events neither of them could have predicted. And far above in her penthouse suite, Ava Sinclair found herself glancing out at the storm and wondering why for the first time in years she hoped to cross paths with a stranger again. The next morning, Gavin stood in front of the bulletin board outside the HR office, his hands deep in his pockets, pretending he wasn't looking at the thing that stung more than he cared to admit. There it was, the interview list for Blake and Harper's administrative position. Names that belonged to another world: Bradford Kensington IV, Amelia Worthington, Julian Devereaux. He didn't have to guess which ones wore tailored suits and spoke in a tone that made people lean in. Gavin Carter wasn't on that list anymore. One man, mid-30s, flawless navy suit, passed by and gave him the kind of smile you give a stranger on the subway, polite but distant. Gavin imagined him at the interview yesterday. Dry hair, perfect timing, maybe even a joke to charm the panel. Gavin had been 30 minutes late, shoes squeaking, rain dripping off his hair. No contest. He sighed and turned away. Across the city, Ava Sinclair sat at the head of a mahogany conference table finalizing follow-ups from the massive deal she'd signed the day before. Everyone around her buzzed with polite urgency, tossing around words like synergy and long-term positioning. But her mind was elsewhere. That man in the rain. The stranger who had stopped when no one else did. She'd built her life on speed and precision, signing million-dollar contracts, dismissing unnecessary distractions. And yet, she'd spent part of her morning replaying a single sentence in her head: "No one deserves to be left stuck like that." "Ms. Sinclair." Her assistant's voice broke through. Ava blinked. "Yes, you asked for the candidate list for the facility's contract position. It's ready." The irony wasn't lost on her. She took the folder without another word, her eyes scanning a list of names, none familiar. Not that she expected to see him. People like that didn't usually reappear, but some part of her hoped. That evening, in their small apartment, Ellie was perched on the couch, knees tucked under her chin. On the coffee table sat a bowl of popcorn, a notebook, and the serious expression she wore whenever she was about to do something important. "Dad," she said as he kicked off his work boots. "Interview time." He raised an eyebrow. "Interview for what? Pretty sure the only job I've got is making dinner." She flipped open her notebook. "Mr. Carter, can you tell me why you think you're qualified to be—" "My dad." He froze mid-step, then chuckled. "Qualified, I've been holding the title for 9 years. Yes, but I'd like to review your performance." She tapped her pencil like a seasoned manager. "Strengths. Good at fixing squeaky doors, average at pancakes, exceptional at making up bedtime stories." She pretended to write furiously, then leaned in, her voice softening. "You're also really good at showing up, even when you're tired, even when you don't have to." The humor slipped for a moment. Gavin swallowed hard. "That's the job, kid." "No," she said, shaking her head. "That's love." He reached out and pulled her into a hug. Her small arms wrapped around his neck, strong for her size. "You know," he murmured, "I think you might be better at interviews than the real ones." She grinned. "That's because I already know the answer." The next day, fate, or something like it, played a quiet hand. A temp agency called with an offer, 1 week of evening janitorial work at a downtown high-rise. The pay wasn't much, but it covered the groceries. Gavin took it without hesitation. What he didn't know, at least not yet, was that the building's top floors belonged to Sinclair & Co. Ava stepped out of her chauffeured car in front of that same building later that evening. She had just returned from a tense investor dinner, her mind still circling over a clause in the contract she'd signed. As she passed the glass lobby, a flash of movement caught her eye, someone kneeling to wipe the marble floor wearing a gray janitor's uniform. She didn't think much of it. Not until a few seconds later, a little girl in a pink raincoat skipped into view, clutching a thermos and grinning like the whole world belonged to her. The man straightened, taking the thermos from her. His profile was unmistakable. It was him, the stranger from the rain. Before she could even process the thought, the little girl glanced up at her. "Aren't you the lady with the stuck shoe?" Ava froze. Her assistant, walking beside her, glanced between them in confusion. Gavin turned at the sound of his daughter's voice, his expression caught between surprise and an almost shy smile. "Ellie." But the little girl was already explaining. "My dad helped you in the rain." "You didn't say thank you." "Well, not really." The room seemed to tilt. Ava felt the heat rise to her cheeks, not something that happened often. "I suppose I didn't," she admitted, voice lower than usual. Her assistant cleared his throat. "Ms. Sinclair, the board is waiting." But Ava wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at Gavin, who simply said, "Wasn't expecting to see you here." She searched his face for any trace of smugness but found none. Only that same steady look he'd had in the rain. For reasons she couldn't name, she said, "Maybe we'll talk again." And then she turned toward the elevator, heart tapping a little too fast for her own liking. Far below, Ellie tugged on Gavin's sleeve. "She's pretty," she whispered. He gave a small, amused huff. "She's something." Ellie grinned knowingly. "I think she likes you." He ruffled her hair, shaking his head. "Don't start, kiddo." But later that night, as they walked home under the city's sodium glow, Gavin found himself replaying the way Ava Sinclair had looked at him in that moment, not like a janitor, not like a stranger, but like a question she wasn't sure she wanted answered just yet. It was one of those early spring afternoons in New York, where the sun played tricks, bright light pouring between buildings but a wind sharp enough to cut through your coat. Gavin was on his knees in the 27th floor hallway of the Sinclair & Company Tower, scrubbing at a stubborn scuff on the polished marble. He'd taken the temp janitorial shift without thinking much of it. Work was work. Besides, Ellie liked coming along on the quieter evenings when she could do her homework at an empty lobby desk and pretend she was assistant to the boss. He didn't realize that today their path would take them straight to her. Ava Sinclair had just left a tense call with the board. Her heels clicked against the marble as she strode down the corridor toward the executive conference room, scanning through the last bullet points on her tablet. She was late, and she hated being late. From the corner of her eye, she caught a flash of movement, Ellie skipping toward the elevators, her pink cardigan swinging, clutching a lunchbox like it held state secrets. "Dad, where do I put this?" Ellie's voice floated back, followed by Gavin stepping into view wearing the gray janitor's uniform, hair tousled from the wind outside. Ava's steps faltered. She'd seen him last night, and the rain night before that. It was starting to feel less like coincidence and more like inevitability. Before she could speak, Ellie spotted her. Her eyes widened in recognition. "Oh, it's you, the lady with the shoe." The words echoed across the hallway. Ava froze mid-step. Two board members standing by the glass wall turned to look. Gavin straightened, shooting his daughter a gentle, warning look. "Ellie?" But Ellie was undeterred voice full of 9-year-old clarity. "You remember, right? My dad helped you when your heel got stuck. You were in a hurry." Something in Ava's chest tightened, not from embarrassment alone, but from the faint shadow of guilt she'd been ignoring. She cleared her throat. "Yes, I remember." Her eyes flicked to Gavin. "You work here?" "Temporary contract," he replied simply, no apology in his tone. "Just trying to keep the lights on." Ellie grinned. "He's really good at it. The best." One of the board members coughed, clearly amused. Ava could feel the heat creeping up her neck. She wasn't used to being caught off guard, especially not by a janitor and his daughter in the middle of her own domain. Still, she said, "I don't believe I properly thanked you." Gavin gave a small shrug. "Didn't do it for thanks." The way he said it without an ounce of flattery made something flicker behind her eyes. But the elevator pinged and her assistant gestured urgently. "Perhaps we'll talk again," Ava said finally before stepping inside. As the doors closed, she caught Ellie's whisper. "She is pretty, right?" followed by Gavin's low chuckle. That evening, in the quiet of the maintenance office, one of the senior janitors clapped Gavin on the shoulder. "Careful around the top floors," he said with a smirk. "People talk." Gavin frowned. "Talk about what?" The man shrugged. "Just saying. Folks don't like it when the worlds mix, especially her world." Gavin didn't reply, but the words stuck to him longer than he wanted to admit. Across the building, Ava sat in her private office, city lights sprawling out behind her. She told herself she was reviewing contracts, but the truth was she was replaying the hallway scene. The way Ellie's eyes had sparkled with that fierce, innocent loyalty. The way Gavin had met her gaze without flinching even in front of her peers. She remembered suddenly being 9 herself, standing in the marble foyer of her parents' mansion holding a trophy from a school debate competition and realizing no one in her family had bothered to attend. It was a memory she rarely let surface. But tonight it sat heavy. The next day, fate twisted the threads tighter. Gavin was pushing his supply cart down the executive wing when he heard Ellie's laughter echo from the reception area. He turned the corner to find her perched on one of the plush chairs, chatting with Ava, chatting like they'd known each other for years. "She says she's never eaten peanut butter out of the jar," Ellie announced, eyes wide with disbelief. Ava chuckled, a sound that startled Gavin more than it should have. "I haven't." "Should I?" Ellie nodded solemnly. "It's a life skill." Gavin stepped in. "Ellie, you're supposed to be reading, remember?" Ellie tilted her head. "I was." Then she came over and said hi. "You don't ignore CEOs. It's bad networking." Ava smiled faintly, but her gaze on Gavin lingered a beat too long. "Your daughter has a sharp mind." "She gets it from her mother," Gavin replied automatically before the air shifted slightly at the unspoken absence in the room. "Ellie, ever the bridge piped up? Maybe we could teach you peanut butter skills sometime." Gavin gave her a look, but Ava's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a no. Maybe she said softly. What none of them noticed was the figure watching from the far end of the corridor, a sharply dressed senior VP expression unreadable. As Ava walked back toward her office, the whisper began its slow crawl through the building, the janitor and the CEO's sudden familiarity. And somewhere deep down, Gavin felt the faint tremor of a fault line forming one he knew could crack wide open if he wasn't careful. "Do queens ever get lonely?" Ava blinked. She had come down to the lobby for 5 minutes of quiet and a chamomile tea that her doctor insisted would be good for the headaches. The first thing she heard was the small, clear voice of a 9-year-old perched on the edge of a leather chair like a juror who had already reached a verdict. Ellie swung her feet, not quite touching the marble. "Because queens sit on really high chairs and sometimes nobody knows how to climb up there." Ava found herself smiling before she could stop it. "Depends on the queen." "What about you?" Ellie asked, eyes unblinking, guileless, and surgical all at once. Ava Sinclair, whose calendar had never had room for idle questions, actually hesitated. "I prefer good company to high chairs." "Good answer," Ellie said, satisfied. "My dad says high chairs are for toddlers." Ellie. Gavin's voice carried from the revolving doors. He pushed the supply cart in with one hand, the other raised in apology. "Ms. Sinclair, I'm sorry if she's not," Ava said, surprising them both. "She's conversational." Ellie beamed. "That means interesting. Dad." "I told you." Gavin parked the cart by the service corridor. "You're supposed to be reading." "I am reading," Ellie protested, patting her backpack. "People." Ava gave a soft huff that might have been a laugh. It felt unfamiliar and good, like opening a window that had been painted shut. "What are you learning that grown-ups talk around things?" Ellie answered instantly. Like when they want help, but they don't ask, or when they like someone, but they pretend they don't because they're busy being important. Gavin pinched the bridge of his nose. "We're going to talk about boundaries when we get home." Ellie leaned closer to Ava, stage whispering, "Boundaries is dad speak for stop being right in public." Ava's laugh escaped fully this time, bright and quick. Heads turned behind the reception desk. A few assistants exchanged looks as if they'd just seen a statue blink. Gavin shifted, suddenly aware of the density of the lobby, the security guards, the 2 interns waiting for badges, the senior VP from strategy standing by the column pretending not to watch. A small warning bell rang in the back of his mind. Different worlds. Same room. He stepped between the chair and the cart. "We should get upstairs." "Wait," Ellie said, digging in her backpack. She produced a tiny jar with a plastic spoon taped to it. Emergency peanut butter. For queens who don't have time for dinner. Ava stared at the jar, caught completely off guard. It's sealed, Ellie added quickly, dead serious, and I wiped the top with a disinfectant wipe because Dad says elevators are basically germ parties. Gavin's ears went red. Ellie. Ava accepted the jar as if it were a medal. Thank you. This might be the kindest thing anyone's handed me all week. She glanced at Gavin. You're raising a diplomat. More like a tiny union rep, he said dryly. She negotiates bedtime. I settle bedtime, Ellie corrected. Negotiation implies debate. Ava pressed her lips together to keep from laughing again. She wasn't used to this unarmored ease with a stranger's child, this feeling of being seen without being appraised. She set the jar gently in her bag like something fragile. Miss Sinclair, a clipped voice floated from the security desk. Marjorie Pike, Senior, VP Strategy, Tailored Navy, sheath eyes like cold glass. Conference call in 7. Ava nodded. On my way. Marjorie's gaze flicked from the jar in Ava's bag to Gavin's uniform to Ellie's swinging feet. The smallest arch of an eyebrow. Message received. Ava felt the old armor try to climb back up her spine. She didn't let it. Not this time. Ellie, she said, softening the edges of her voice. Thank you for the company and the dinner insurance. You're welcome, Ellie said, then added with the gravity of a notary public, you should smile more. Your face gets prettier when it remembers. Ellie. Gavin again, mortified, amused, outnumbered. It's all right, Ava said, and it was. Sometimes I forget. She turned to go, then stopped. Mr. Carter, there's a children's book drive in the atrium tomorrow. Drop a list of Ellie's favorites with the reception. I'll make sure they're represented. Gavin's mouth opened closed. You don't have to. I know, she said, and walked toward the elevators before he could decline a second time. Ellie watched the doors slide shut and then looked up at her father triumphant. See, not lonely. Gavin exhaled. Kid, you're playing chess while I'm still looking for the board. The rumor began 12 minutes later. That was how long it took Marjorie Pike to reach the 32nd floor step into the glass fishbowl of the strategy bullpen and say in a voice designed for plausible deniability, Has anyone noticed how accessible Ms. Sinclair's become? By the time it hit operations, the sentence had mutated. The CEO is socializing with staff in the lobby, by facilities with the janitor, by legal with a janitor and a child who brings her food. Gavin felt it first as static stares that lingered, a hushed conversation ending when he turned the corner with the mop bucket. He'd felt this before in other buildings, other lives, the gravity of assumption pulling decent moments out of shape. He kept his head down and worked. Soap water polish. The old rituals that always told the truth. Ellie, oblivious to adult weather systems, colored at the corner table, then popped up beside him. Dad, can queens come to regular people's houses? Why to learn peanut butter? He leaned on the handle, face softening. Let's not invite royalty into our rent-controlled palace just yet. She could sit on the floor, Ellie said practical. High chairs are for toddlers. He almost laughed, and then he didn't. Listen, Elle, people here, they live on different floors. Sometimes they don't like the stairs between them. Ellie considered this unpersuaded. Then they need better shoes, she said, as if the whole city could be fixed by cobblers and courage. Near closing, Ava reappeared at the lobby security desk. She'd made her calls, fought 2 fires, and signed a letter that would keep a satellite office open through summer. The chamomile had gone cold in its paper cup. Gavin was wiping down the brass rail by the revolving doors. He didn't look up until she was close enough to smell the rain in her hair. I thought of a rule, she said. He frowned, wary and amused. A rule. For queens, she said deadpan. Accept emergency peanut butter, and don't ignore the people who keep your castle clean. He looked at her, then really looked, and something wry and warm creased the corner of his mouth. I'll second that. Ava leaned against the rail just for a moment. I don't have many people who talk to me like people. Occupational hazard, he said. Power makes everyone's sentences weird. A corner of her lip lifted. And what do you do with weird sentences? Translate, he said simply, into actions. A beat. The lobby hummed around them. Two worlds balanced on the same square tile. Ms. Sinclair, Marjorie's voice again nearer this time. The London call moved up. We'll need you upstairs. Coming, Ava replied, but didn't move right away. She glanced toward Ellie, who was making an origami crown out of a receipt. She's luminous. Yeah, Gavin said softly, the word full of history. She keeps the lights on. Marjorie's gaze swept the scene. Ava relaxed the janitor, unflustered the child. Folding paper royalty and something like disdain clicked into place. She turned sharply on her heel. Ava pushed off the rail. Good night, Mr. Carter. Good night, Miss Sinclair. As she walked away, Ellie called after her. Don't forget the jar. Ava lifted her bag. Not a chance. Upstairs, Marjorie fell in step beside her. With respect, Ava, optics matter. Kindness isn't a scandal, Ava said without looking over. It can be spun into one. Ava stopped. The hallway's glass threw their reflections back at them, two women in different kinds of armor. So can cruelty, she said quietly. Which one do you want to be seen practicing? Marjorie pressed her lips together, said nothing, and moved on. Ava stood alone. A beat longer, the city stretched out like circuitry beneath the windows. In her bag, the emergency jar knocked lightly against her phone, a childish, homely sound that somehow steadied her. Downstairs, Gavin steered the cart toward the service elevator. He could feel the rumor beginning to gather like weather over the building. He could also feel something else small, inconvenient, bright as a match in wind. Ellie slipped her hand into his. Did we do a good thing today? We did a decent thing, he said. That's harder to argue with. She nodded, satisfied. Tomorrow, I'll bring crackers. Peanut butter needs friends. Gavin laughed under his breath, and the sound followed them into the elevator. The doors slid shut on the lobby's polished sheen, and the tiny crown Ellie had left on the chair sat glowing in the lamplight paper fragile, impossible to ignore. The first thing Gavin noticed when he walked into the apartment that night was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that hummed like a power line before it snaps. Ellie sat cross-legged at the small kitchen table, her coloring book untouched. She was staring at an envelope. Thick, expensive paper, no return address. Where did you get that? Gavin asked, setting his keys in the chipped bowl by the door. A man dropped it off, she said, eyes still on the envelope. He knew your name. He said, tell your dad the past doesn't stay buried. Gavin froze. For a moment, the hum in the air became a roar in his ears. He took the envelope, weighed it in his hand. Did you let him in? His voice was too sharp. Ellie shook her head. Mrs. D'Amato from 3B was in the hall. She didn't like his shoes. Gavin managed a ghost of a smile at that, then tore open the flap. Inside, 2 photographs. The first him 10 years younger in a suit shaking hands with a man in front of a construction site. The man was now serving a federal sentence for fraud. The second, a grainy shot of him outside the courthouse after the trial. And next to him, Ava. Or, rather, Ava, much younger, hair pulled back in a severe knot, standing beside her father. The note, scrawled beneath, read, Funny how circles close. Gavin sat down hard. Dad Ellie's voice was small. Is that the Queen? He slid the photos back into the envelope. It's just an old story, one that didn't end well. Ellie frowned. Then maybe it needs a different ending. He looked at her, wondering how someone so small could make the simplest sentences feel like instructions. The next day, the lobby buzzed with the kind of tension that didn't have a name yet. Gavin kept his head down, mop moving, and practiced arcs, but the static was thicker now. When Ava stepped out of the elevator, every conversation on the mezzanine seemed to pause for one breath too long. Mr. Carter, she said, her tone warmer than the marble underfoot. Could I see you for a moment? He followed her to a quiet alcove near the side entrance. She waited until the door closed behind them before speaking. Someone's been asking about you, she said. He met her eyes. Someone's been asking about you, too. A flicker of surprise. You got something? He pulled the envelope from his jacket